standard deck building rule is you can't have less than 60 cards in your deck. 61 including your hero. Some of the other methods of playing, whether it be tournament play or draft play, don't know what they call it, but there's one where you just pull from booster packs. But there are different rules altogether. But just friendly play, basic rule is no less than 60 cards in your deck, 61 including your hero. Now, when you're building your deck as well, there's another rule of, oh, by the way, with the 60 cards per deck, that is a minimum. You can have more than 60 cards in your deck. You can have 60, 70, 80, 100, 120 cards in your deck. Any more than 65, though, 64, I wouldn't really recommend, because you start watering down your deck and losing a little bit more control of what cards you can have come out. Primarily, you're building your deck to ensure that you have the greatest chance of getting the best cards come out as often as possible. There's another rule that allows you to facilitate this, and that's the rule of fours. And what that basically means is you can have multiples of the same card in your deck, but you cannot have more than 4 of the same card in your deck. Again, that is a standard rule. There are other elements of this game, other cards that have specific rules, and they are stated on the card that you can have either they're an unlimited card or they are a unique card. Now, a unique card will specify on the card it has uniqueness, and beside that word it will have in brackets the number 1. What that basically means is you can only have one of that particular card in play at any given time. If you decide to put a second card with that identifier on it, then you have to destroy or put into your graveyard the original card, and then you can play the second card. The other one would be a card that has a card like this that has unlimited. And if I can get my camera to focus, okay, what that card allows me to do is put any number of this card in my deck that I want. Standard rule is 4, but because I have unlimited on the card, I can put as many of these cards in my deck as often as I want. The reason for this most likely is because this is a relatively, or can be a relatively weak card. I have 7 of these in this particular deck. This is my Death Knight deck. Now, there's a reason why I have 7. You might look at the card on its own and say that's a pretty crappy card, but if put in combination with other cards, it can be a fairly useful card. There are other cards in there. The other restriction when you're building your deck is once you've established that your deck is going to be either an alliance deck or a horde deck, then all your allies either have to be neutral or they have to be horde. You cannot put an alliance ally in a horde deck. It's just not done. The other restriction when you're building a deck is your traits. In this particular circumstance, my hero is a Death Knight. So that basically means all of my abilities either have to be neutral or they have to be Death Knight abilities. I cannot put a Shaman ability in a Death Knight deck. Okay? Now, what I mean by that is these are your abilities. When you're selecting your abilities to put in your deck, you will notice on the top right hand side of the card, this one specifically has two traits on it, 2 classes that this card can go in. This can go into a Death Knight deck, or this can go into, if I'm not mistaken, a Shaman deck. Don't know the icons very well yet, but it can go into a Shaman deck or a Death Knight deck. Now, if you were to look at the next card, this one is specifically for and can only be played in Death Knight decks, as indicated by the single icon up in this, which states that it can only be played in a Death Knight deck. So that's the other restriction that you have on there. If you come across an ability card that has no icons in this corner, then that would be considered a neutral ability, and it can be played in any deck that you want. So that's that restriction that you have there. Another restriction when you're talking about equipment or weapons or armor, see if I can get this to go right, is what I referred to as the light bar that's on your equipment selection. This one tells me that I can put this particular item in a deck that is either a Death Knight deck, a Shaman deck, or a Warrior deck. And which also coincide, well, it doesn't coincide, but here's another example. You will notice on this particular card, any class can use this card because on the light bar, all of the traits are lit up. And as we go a little bit further, this one as well, it has restrictions. It can only be played in a Death Knight deck, a Paladin deck, or a Warrior deck. And so on and so forth with that type of thing, as you'll see. And again, on this one, it can only be played in a Death Knight, a Shaman, or a Warrior deck. Those are some more restrictions that you might have on there. Aside from that, there's one other restriction that I'm going to look for right now, and this, you have to keep this in mind when you're building your deck as well. You might have situations like this where you want to play this card, okay? And you'll notice on this card, in the text, it says, if I can get it to focus, Orc Hero required. So I can only put this card in my deck if I have an Orc as a hero. Now, in my particular circumstance, in this case, this is my hero that I'm using for this deck, and as you can see right here, it is an Orc Death Knight, so it is an Orc hero. So I am allowed to put this card into that deck. Put that one back over there. Aside from that, building a deck is how you build your deck, focus, is personal preference. I can't get my camera to focus right now. How you build your deck is personal preference. You have to establish what type of player you are, and once you figure that out, then building the deck is a little bit easier. There are basically, as far as I know, 3 types of decks: a control deck, a rush deck, and what I would consider a defensive deck. The rush deck is a very aggressive deck. It's designed to go in there, get the job done, and end the game quickly. That's a rush deck. The control deck is neither strong nor weak. It's got equal amounts of aggressiveness and defensiveness. I don't really play with those types of decks, to my knowledge. And then there is a defensive deck, which basically, from my understanding as well, is all about healing and armor. Stay alive as long as you can and hopefully tire out or drain your opponent of his cards. The strategy behind a deck like that might be to do what's called decking your opponent, and that's another way of winning the game. When you deck your opponent, that basically means that they've utilized all of their cards and have no more cards to pull from, and so effectively they cannot continue playing the game, and you have won. Those are basic. Once you've established the type of player that you are, then you can build your deck around that. A lot of people, when they're building their decks will be primarily designed around a particular card, whether it be designed around your hero, whether it be designed to support a particular weapon that you have in your deck, whether it be designed to utilize a particular quest card that you have, or for that matter, it might be designed to utilize a particular ally card. Just for fun, decks might have themes. Just happens to be that this is primarily an Orc deck. 2 reasons for that is I play the MMO and I'm an Orc in the MMO, and some of the abilities that make this deck strong require me to have a lot of Orcs in them. I will show you what I mean by that. And when you're also building your deck, you have to be conscious of what cards work well with other cards. I'm also going to show you that, using this deck as an example. So we'll just break. I will set this up for what I consider with this deck to be the perfect hand. How often that happens, I don't know, because I haven't really played with this deck that often. But under perfect conditions, this is what I would consider to be the perfect hand for this deck. Okay, so this is what I would consider in this deck one of the perfect scenarios. Okay, my opponent has just finished his turn. The turn comes back to me. I am going to pick up a card. As you can see, my hand is pretty limited. Well, I've got probably more than normal as far as cards are concerned in my hand that I would normally have at this particular time. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 resources that I can spend. And I forgot. Okay, nope. So in this situation, this is how this is going to work, and this is why it's going. This is why I built my deck this way for this particular situation. Already established that I have an Orc hero. I've got this card here that allows me to 10 damage at a cost of 1. Okay. The problem with the cost of 1 is I have to sacrifice a card. That card has to be either human or orc, which is why I have 7 of these cards in my hand. These are all labeled Orc Warrior. Actually, out of the 12 to 15 allies that I have in my hand, I'd say at least 12 of them are Orc, because I can dispose of one of these to utilize that weapon. This particular this one card here also gives me a +1 attack on my hero, a +1 attack on my turn. I believe, yes, +1 attack, and it has an armor of 1. Okay, so my hero is able to attack because it has a weapon. It also has armor, which benefits it as well. So on my turn, I've picked up a card. I'm going to play down a resource over here. This is the perfect scenario for me. I am going to, first of all, exhaust this, but in order to use that, I have to get rid of one of my grunts. He's going to go into the discard pile. Allows me to attack 10 hit points to my opponent. And I'm also going to exhaust my hero. I've only used I've only used one resource, which I'm going to turn now. Okay, I've already done 10 damage on him. Now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 resources left. I'm going to exhaust another resource, and I'm going to put this ally into play. This ally, so you can get a close-up of this one here, is an Orc Shaman. When Ray something something enters play, ready your hero and one of your weapons. Okay, so he's entered play. I'm going to ready this weapon, ready my hero, which allows me to use it again. So I'm going to exhaust it. I'm going to pay one more resource, and I'm going to get rid of another orc. That gives me another hit of 10. So that's 20 hits in one shot. Hopefully, and I still have this orc that can attack, which will probably end up dying anyway, and he will go into the graveyard. In this particular deck, that's the perfect scenario for me. Again, I'm not great at building decks, but that's how I have built this deck for that scenario to come up, and hopefully come up multiple times. And there you go. That's a little bit on how this deck works. Thanks, guys.